The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own breathing sound too loud. I had returned to my childhood home for the first time in years, a place heavy with memories both fond and haunting. The house had been empty since my parents' deaths, but something about it always called to me, a siren song I couldn't quite ignore. Tonight, the call felt different, urgent, insistent. I woke up to the sound of dripping. A steady, rhythmic plop plop plop, like water leaking from a pipe. The air smelled damp, sour, a smell I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. My childhood bed creaked beneath me as I sat up. Moonlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting jagged shadows across the room. Something felt wrong. The walls seemed darker than they should have been, the once familiar pastel paint swallowed by patches of black. I leaned closer, squinting. The patches moved. My breath caught as I watched the blackness ripple, like ink spreading through water. It was alive. A thick, gelatinous substance oozed from the corners, pulsating as if it were breathing. I gagged on the sharp, acrid stench that filled the room, a mixture of mildew and something metallic. Ella. The whisper was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. It was her voice. My sister's voice. Leah had been gone for 10 years. Run, Ella. My feet hit the floor before I could think. The cold hardwood felt sticky underfoot, and when I looked down, I saw thin tendrils of black mold snaking toward me. They moved with purpose. I bolted for the door, yanking it open with trembling hands. The hallway was worse. The walls heaved, the black substance pulsating like veins pumping tar. The family photos that once lined the walls were gone, replaced by irregular holes where the mold had eaten through. The dripping sound was louder now, echoing from somewhere below. Ella, hurry. Leah's voice again, faint and urgent. It came from the stairs. I hesitated for a moment, then forced myself forward. My hand slid on the banister, slick with the same black ooze, and I nearly fell. The staircase seemed longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly downward, the shadows deepening with each step. The living room was unrecognizable. The furniture had been consumed by the spreading mold, reduced to skeletal frames. The TV flickered with static, casting eerie light across the room. In the corner, the grandfather clock, my father's pride and joy, stood warped and dripping, its once polished wood rotting away. I turned toward the front door, but the entryway was gone. In its place was a wall of undulating blackness, pulsating with slow, deliberate movements. The mold, no, the thing, was closing in, narrowing the room with each passing second. Run! Leah's voice was louder now, almost screaming. I turned, and for a moment, I saw her. She stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her pale face framed by her dark hair. But her eyes, they were wrong. They were too large, too bright, reflecting the static of the TV. Leah. I whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed behind me. I turned just in time to see the mold surge forward, a massive wave of gelatinous blackness reaching for me. I screamed and ran, diving past Leah into the kitchen. The floor squelched under my feet, and the smell was unbearable. The black substance was everywhere, covering the walls, the ceiling, even the appliances. The refrigerator door creaked open, and I caught a glimpse of something inside, a mass of writhing tendrils, studded with eyes that blinked in unison. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair as the mold advanced. This way. Leah's voice called, but when I turned, she was gone. The back door stood open, swinging slightly in an unseen breeze. I didn't think, I ran for it. The door slammed shut just as I reached it, and the whispers began. Not Leah's voice this time, but dozens, maybe hundreds of voices, overlapping and murmuring. Some were pleading, others laughing, a chorus of madness. The walls closed in, the mold pressing closer, and I felt it, a wet, cold touch against my arm. I screamed and slapped at it, but it stuck, burning like acid. "You can't leave." The voices spoke as one now, deep and resonant, vibrating through the air. She couldn't either. Something moved in the corner of my vision, and I turned to see Leah again. But she was wrong. Her skin was pale, translucent, and her limbs were too long, bending in impossible angles. The static in her eyes grew brighter as she smiled, revealing teeth that were sharp and jagged. "I told you to run," she said, her voice distorting, layered with the others. "But it's too late now." The mold surged forward, engulfing her, and then it reached for me. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed as the blackness closed over my face, cold and suffocating. The last thing I heard was the sound of Leah's laughter, echoing in the dark. I've always loved the forest. As a child, it was a playground. As an adult, it became my retreat. There was something timeless about the towering trees, the rustling leaves, the dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy. Whenever life overwhelmed me, I'd pack a bag, lace up my boots, and lose myself in the woods. This time was no different. I had argued with my boss, my friends, even my family. The weight of it all pressed down on me, and the forest was my only refuge. I told no one where I was going. It was just me, the trail, and the promise of solitude. I didn't mean to wander so far. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place to escape the suffocating demands of life. I told myself I'd follow the marked trail, keep my phone's GPS handy, and stick to my usual route. But as the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, curiosity got the better of me. A narrow, overgrown path branched off from the main trail, and something about it beckoned me. The air was cooler there, the scent of pine sharper. It felt untouched, secret. I couldn't resist. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Birdsong faded, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves overhead. My footsteps sounded too loud, crunching on the uneven ground. It wasn't long before the path disappeared altogether, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. I turned back the way I thought I'd come, but everything looked the same, tall, imposing trees stretching endlessly in every direction. That's when I saw the glade. It appeared suddenly, a break in the trees that felt almost deliberate. The grass within was a sickly yellow-green, uneven and brittle. The trees surrounding the glade were enormous, their trunks gnarled and ancient, their bark a deep, unnatural shade of gray. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't explain. Then I saw the faces. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. The grooves and knots in the bark seemed to twist into human shapes, a cheekbone here, a hollowed eye socket there. But as I moved closer, the details sharpened. These weren't random patterns. These were faces, unmistakably human. Their expressions were frozen in agony. Wide eyes stared unseeing, mouths open in silent screams. Some appeared to be mid-shout, their bark lips stretched unnaturally. Others seemed caught in quiet despair, their features slack with hopelessness. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. And then I saw them move. The faces turned, ever so slightly, following me as I stepped backward. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that their mouths, once frozen open, were moving now. They were whispering, but no sound came out. Panic set in. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping against my face. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that glade. But the forest had other plans. No matter how far I ran, the trees grew denser, their shadows stretching and twisting. It felt like the forest itself was closing in on me. Finally, I stopped, gasping for breath. My legs burned, my lungs ached, and my head spun from the effort. I looked around, hoping against hope to see a familiar landmark, but instead, I saw the glade. I had returned to it. The faces were different now. They were familiar. My mother's kind eyes stared back at me, her face contorted in pain. My childhood friend, Rachel, her bark lips trembling as if to plead with me. My boss, my neighbor, even the cashier from the corner store, one by one, I recognized them all. Their faces etched in bark, their features twisted in suffering. Why? I whispered, my voice trembling. The whispers grew louder. Still silent, still without sound, but somehow deafening in my mind. The faces' mouths moved faster, their eyes unblinking as they fixed on me. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, trying to shut them out, but their presence was overwhelming. I felt them inside me, their despair, their pain. It was as though the glade itself was alive, feeding off their torment, and mine. The light began to fade, the edges of the glade darkening as night fell. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural groan that seemed to come from the earth itself. I looked up, and the faces were closer now, their expressions more desperate. Their mouths opened wider, their silent screams stretching into endless black voids. I tried to run again, but my body refused to move. Roots snaked up from the ground, coiling around my ankles and wrists, pulling me down. The grass beneath me split open, revealing a writhing mass of roots and tendrils that pulsed with a sickly light. The faces loomed above me, their features merging and shifting, becoming one grotesque, ever-changing visage. It smiled, a cruel, mocking smile, and I realized too late what it wanted. The roots tightened, the tendrils encircling my chest, my throat. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. The last thing I saw was my own reflection, my face emerging in the bark of the nearest tree, my mouth open in a silent scream. There are moments in life when everything feels like it's slipping through your fingers, moments when you need to escape. For me, that's what led me to the cave. A hike, I thought, would clear my head, give me space to think. But I didn't plan the route carefully, didn't tell anyone where I was going. It was supposed to be a simple distraction, just me, the quiet woods, and the solid earth beneath my feet. I woke to the sound of dripping water and the unsettling chill of damp stone against my back. My head throbbed, a dull ache radiating through my skull as I blinked into complete darkness. Panic set in almost immediately. I had no memory of how I got here, wherever here was. My breaths came fast, each one catching in the cold, stagnant air. Fumbling with trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and found my phone. Relief flooded me when the screen lit up, casting a faint glow around the space. The cave walls were jagged and close, their surfaces slick with moisture. The light barely penetrated the oppressive darkness, revealing only a few feet ahead of me. My heart pounded as I scanned the cavern. There was no sign of anyone else, no clue how I'd ended up in this suffocating void. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of water in the distance and my own labored breathing. I stood, my legs shaky, and shone the light around. The cave stretched endlessly in one direction, narrowing into a tunnel. I had no choice but to move. Staying still felt like inviting the dark to swallow me whole. With each step, my sneakers scraped against the uneven ground, the sound amplified in the silence. The air grew colder as I walked, and the walls seemed to close in, forcing me to hunch. My phone's flashlight flickered, and my stomach dropped. I couldn't afford to lose the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft and deliberate, echoing faintly from somewhere ahead. I froze, holding my breath. The steps stopped. I told myself it was just the sound of my own movements bouncing back at me. This place was playing tricks on my senses. But when I took another step, the echo didn't match. My foot scraped forward, and a second later, the sound of a footfall followed, slightly delayed, slightly off. My chest tightened, and I spun around, shining the light into the blackness behind me. Nothing. Just the jagged, empty tunnel. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky and thin. The word bounced back to me in distorted fragments, overlapping itself until it faded into silence. I turned back and kept moving, faster now. The echoes grew louder, more distinct, and they no longer waited for me to move. I broke into a run, my heart hammering in my chest, the light from my phone shaking wildly with every step. The footsteps followed, matching my pace perfectly. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and I stumbled to a halt, gasping for air. The sound of footsteps continued, circling the edge of the space, though I could see no one. My phone's light barely reached the walls, which seemed to ripple in the dim glow. My skin prickled as I realized the movement wasn't an illusion. Something was shifting, pulsing just beneath the surface of the stone. And then the echoes stopped. Silence. Oppressive and deafening. I strained to hear anything, my ears catching only the sound of my ragged breaths. "Who's there?" I whispered. My voice felt swallowed by the cavern. The answer came not as a sound but as a sensation. A presence, heavy and suffocating, pressing against me from all sides. My phone flickered again, the light dimming further until it barely illuminated my own hands. The walls began to whisper. Soft, sibilant voices that seemed to come from every direction at once. They spoke no words I could understand, only a low, rhythmic murmur that wormed its way into my head. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating through my skull. The light went out completely. Panic overtook me. I clawed at the phone, shaking it, willing it to come back to life. The whispers grew louder, rising to a cacophony that drowned out my frantic gasps. And then, impossibly, the darkness moved. Shapes emerged in the void, darker than the surrounding blackness. They had no defined form, shifting and writhing like living shadows. Eyes blinked open within them, countless pairs of eyes, all fixated on me. The footsteps resumed, impossibly loud, pounding toward me from every direction. I screamed and ran blindly, the echoes chasing me, my own terrified cries swallowed by the cacophony. The ground beneath me felt wrong, slick and yielding, as if the cave itself were alive. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I couldn't stop. Ahead, a faint light appeared, a pinprick in the consuming dark. I surged toward it, hope surging through my veins. The light grew brighter, resolving into the shape of an opening, an escape. I threw myself toward it, my hands outstretched, and hit solid stone. The light was gone. The opening had never been real. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking, as the walls began to close in. The shadows surrounded me, their eyes gleaming with hunger. I felt the ground give way beneath me, and I fell, the void swallowing me whole. The last thing I heard was my own footsteps, echoing endlessly into the dark. If you're reading this, if somehow this reaches you, don't go looking for me. Don't go wandering into places you don't understand. The cave took me, and it'll take you too. There's no escape, no light, no hope. Only the echoes of the hollow. I never should have gone into the cave. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment decisions you immediately regret. My friends had dared me, of course, spurred on by too many beers around the campfire and the lingering thrill of ghost stories. It's just an old mining tunnel, they said. Nothing scary about it. Except it wasn't just a tunnel. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. But by the time I realized the truth, it was already too late. I left my friends laughing behind me, the flashlight on my phone barely enough to cut through the thick darkness as I ventured deeper. The air grew colder with every step, and soon the sound of their voices faded into silence. That was when the fear began to set in. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, and I stumbled to a halt, gasping for air. The sound of footsteps continued, circling the edge of the space, though I could see no one. My phone's light barely reached the walls, which seemed to ripple in the dim glow. My skin prickled as I realized the movement wasn't an illusion. Something was shifting, pulsing just beneath the surface of the stone. And then the echoes stopped. Silence. Oppressive and deafening. I strained to hear anything, my ears catching only the sound of my ragged breaths. "Who's there?" I whispered. My voice felt swallowed by the cavern. The answer came not as a sound but as a sensation. A presence, heavy and suffocating, pressing against me from all sides. My phone flickered again, the light dimming further until it barely illuminated my own hands. The walls began to whisper. Soft, sibilant voices that seemed to come from every direction at once. They spoke no words I could understand, only a low, rhythmic murmur that wormed its way into my head. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating through my skull. The light went out completely. Panic overtook me. I clawed at the phone, shaking it, willing it to come back to life. The whispers grew louder, rising to a cacophony that drowned out my frantic gasps. And then, impossibly, the darkness moved. Shapes emerged in the void, darker than the surrounding blackness. They had no defined form, shifting and writhing like living shadows. Eyes blinked open within them, countless pairs of eyes, all fixated on me. The footsteps resumed, impossibly loud, pounding toward me from every direction. I screamed and ran blindly, the echoes chasing me, my own terrified cries swallowed by the cacophony. The ground beneath me felt wrong, slick and yielding, as if the cave itself were alive. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I couldn't stop. Ahead, a faint light appeared, a pinprick in the consuming dark. I surged toward it, hope surging through my veins. The light grew brighter, resolving into the shape of an opening, an escape. I threw myself toward it, my hands outstretched. And hit solid stone. The light was gone. The opening had never been real. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking, as the walls began to close in. The shadows surrounded me, their eyes gleaming with hunger. I felt the ground give way beneath me, and I fell, the void swallowing me whole. They say curiosity killed the cat, but they never tell you what happens to the ones who don't make it back. If you're reading this, don't look for me. Don't try to find this place. The cave doesn't let go. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. Somewhere, deep within the hollow, my screams still echo. And if you listen closely, the cave will answer. But you won't like what it has to say. It wasn't the kind of place I imagined myself living, but after months of searching for something affordable in the city, I had settled on an old apartment in a dilapidated building on the edge of town. The landlord had warned me about the age of the place, cracked floors, creaky stairs, drafty windows, but he assured me it was still livable. And for the rent, it seemed like a steal. At first, everything was fine. I settled in quickly, unpacked my things, and started to enjoy the quiet. But it didn't take long for the strange things to start happening. Small noises at night, barely noticeable at first, just the house settling, I thought. But then, as the weeks passed, those sounds grew. They grew louder. More disturbing. It wasn't until the scratching began that I realized I wasn't alone. I had no idea then that the place I had moved into would become a nightmare I couldn't escape. It started as a low hum, barely audible, but it was there. Every night, just after midnight, it would begin, a rhythmic, guttural sound that echoed through the walls of my apartment. At first, I thought it was the pipes, old and rusted, groaning under pressure. But as the nights wore on, I realized something was terribly wrong. The sound wasn't coming from the pipes. It was coming from inside the walls. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was just hearing things. But then, one night, the noise grew louder. More insistent. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a scraping sound, like claws dragging across the drywall. I lay still in my bed, heart pounding in my chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the scraping. I knew it wasn't an animal, whatever was in there was too big, too heavy. I convinced myself it was just a rat or a raccoon, something that had found its way into the walls. But then, the scraping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, a thud. A loud, sickening thud, followed by a crackling sound. The walls shook, and I felt the floor beneath me tremble. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to look at the walls. I called the landlord, desperate to get someone in to check for whatever was causing the noise. They assured me they would send someone over, but when they did, the walls were perfectly fine, no damage, no signs of an animal. Just quiet. But that night, the hum returned. This time, I didn't stay in bed. I grabbed a flashlight and crawled over to the far corner of my apartment, where the sound seemed to originate. I pressed my ear against the wall, my breath shallow and fast. It was louder now, closer. And then I felt it, a slight vibration, like something was moving inside. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't move. My eyes scanned the room, my body frozen. The scraping sound was getting faster, more frantic. I stepped back, my feet slipping on the floor, and that's when I heard it, a low, gurgling growl from the other side of the wall. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't a raccoon. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My body felt like lead as I backed away from the wall, shaking uncontrollably. And then, I saw something I will never forget. A crack appeared in the drywall, as if something was pushing against it from the inside. Slowly, agonizingly, the crack widened. I could see something, too large, too wrong, pushing against the wall. And then, it broke through. The thing that emerged wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was monstrous, its body slick and wet, with elongated limbs that seemed to twist unnaturally. Its face, it had no face. Only a mass of writhing tendrils where its eyes should have been. It moved toward me with a speed that defied reason, its mouth opening wide, exposing rows of jagged teeth. The stench of decay filled the room as it slithered toward me, the walls creaking and groaning with its movements. I stumbled backward, tripping over the furniture, my heart pounding in my chest. It was close now, too close. The thing reached out with its long, spindly arms, and I could feel the cold air it dragged with it. The room seemed to close in around me, and I knew I wouldn't survive this. I reached for the door, but my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't turn the knob. The thing was almost on top of me now. I could hear it breathing, low and wet, as it drew closer. And then, everything went dark. I woke up hours later, lying on the floor in the same room. The thing was gone. The walls were intact, no signs of the nightmare that had unfolded only hours before. I thought I was imagining it, that maybe it had all been some terrible dream. But when I stood up, my hand brushed against something cold. Something wet. I looked down. There, in the corner of the room, was a smear of dark liquid. And in the middle of it, a single, twisted claw. It wasn't over. I never believed in the supernatural. I thought mirrors were just reflections, nothing more, nothing less. The glass was a simple tool, a way to see myself and the world around me. But that was before I moved into this apartment. Before everything started to change. It was an old building, the kind you pass on the street without a second thought. The paint was chipped, the floors creaked with every step, and the mirrors, well, they were just old, too. Nothing special about them. But something about this place unsettled me from the start. At night, the air felt heavy, as if the walls were holding secrets. I chalked it up to being a new place in a new city, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was late one evening when I first noticed it. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, just getting ready for bed, when I saw the ripple. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a trick of the light, a shift in the glass. But then, I looked closer. And that's when I saw it, the smile. It appeared at first as just a strange distortion in the mirror. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the reflection smiled at me. A wide, unsettling grin. My own face stayed frozen, terrified, but that thing in the mirror, its smile was getting bigger. Now, it's coming out of the glass, crawling through the frame. It wants me, and I can't escape. Every time I turn away, I feel it creeping closer. And that's how it all began. How the thing in the mirror became something I could no longer ignore. Something I couldn't escape. The smiling thing in the mirror. At first, it was nothing more than a trick of the light, a strange distortion in the glass. I'd been standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, when I noticed it. A ripple, like a wave moving across the surface of the reflection. I blinked, thinking my eyes were just tired, that I was imagining things. But when I looked again, I saw it more clearly, a figure, standing behind me in the reflection, yet I knew no one was there. For a moment, I thought it was my own imagination playing games with me. But then, the figure moved. Slowly, impossibly, it turned its head toward me. My heart skipped in my chest as I saw its face, or rather, the shape of a face. It was wrong. The features were warped, stretched out of proportion, and there was something off about the way its eyes glinted, too wide and too dark. But it wasn't the face that horrified me the most. It was the smile. At first, it was subtle, a twitch of the lips, like it was trying to smile, but couldn't quite manage. And then, it spread. Slowly, impossibly wide. Too wide. A grin that stretched far beyond the limits of what any human face should be able to do. Its mouth opened further, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth. The smile wasn't friendly. It was something else entirely. Something hungry. I froze, unable to look away. My own face in the mirror stayed still, expressionless, like I was trapped in place. My skin was cold with dread, my heart pounding in my chest. The thing in the mirror, though, it wasn't afraid. It wasn't trapped like I was. It was alive. And it was smiling at me. The longer I stared, the bigger the grin grew, its edges stretching and cracking, as if the thing in the reflection was trying to break free. My breath quickened, and my body trembled, but I couldn't move. I wanted to turn away, to look anywhere else, but I couldn't pull my eyes from the thing's smile. It felt like it was pulling me in, inch by inch, its eyes dark and gleaming with something I couldn't understand. And then, just as I thought I might scream, it happened. The reflection of the thing, it moved. It didn't just smile. It reached. At first, I thought I was imagining it, my mind playing tricks on me, but no. I saw it with my own eyes. The thing's hand, long and spindly, stretched out from the surface of the mirror, its fingers curling as it reached toward me. I staggered back, the terror in my chest growing. I couldn't tear my eyes away, no matter how much I tried. And then, the hand broke through. Not a crack, not a break, but it simply emerged from the glass. Cold, clammy fingers wrapped around the edge of the frame, and the thing began to crawl through, its smile widening, its eyes gleaming with malice. It was no longer a reflection. It was real. It was coming for me. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen. The thing's smile was now twisted, grotesque, its mouth opened so wide I could see the dark abyss inside it. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I couldn't hear anything else. The air around me was thick with the scent of something rotten, something foul. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The thing was almost through. Its arms were now fully out of the mirror, thin and spindly, dragging itself toward me with unnatural speed. I felt a chill creep up my spine as it got closer, closer, and I felt its breath, foul and wet, on my neck. I had to move. I snapped out of my stupor and turned, but as I did, I felt a horrible tug. Like the thing was pulling me back, its cold fingers brushing against my skin. I stumbled toward the door, but it was too late. The thing's other hand shot out from the mirror frame, grabbing my wrist with a vice-like grip. Its smile was stretched so wide now, I thought its face would split in two. No. I cried, my voice barely a whisper. Let go. But the thing only grinned wider, its twisted teeth gleaming in the dim light. It was so close now. Too close. I could feel its body, cold, slick, wrong, against mine as it pulled me back toward the mirror, its smile growing beyond anything humanly possible. With all the strength I had left, I wrenched my arm free and staggered backward, falling to the floor. The thing paused for just a moment, watching me, its eyes gleaming with anticipation. Its smile was more than a grin now, it was a promise that it wasn't finished with me. I stumbled to my feet and bolted out of the room, not daring to look back. The sound of the thing's grotesque laughter echoed in my mind as I ran, the image of its distorted face burned into my thoughts. But when I reached the door, I dared to glance at the mirror, just for a second. The thing was still there, watching me. And its smile, it was getting bigger. I used to think I was safe in my own home. I had no reason to believe anything could harm me here, in the place I'd worked so hard to make my sanctuary. But over the past few weeks, everything has changed. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, strange sounds in the night, the feeling of being watched, but now, I know. It's real. Every night, it comes closer. The creature. The thing without eyes. The eyeless beast. I don't know how it found me, but it did. And now, I'm trapped in a nightmare I can't escape. I don't know how it found me. I never saw it before, never heard of anything like it. But now, every night, I hear it. The sounds are unmistakable, a low scraping, the kind you'd expect to hear from claws dragging across the floor, desperate and hungry. Sometimes, it's soft, like it's far away. Other times, it's right behind me, closer than I dare to admit. It's been weeks, maybe longer. Time feels warped. I've tried to ignore it. I've convinced myself it's just my imagination, a trick of my mind after too many sleepless nights. But the sounds, it's not my imagination star. It's real. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just an animal, something small and scurrying in the dark corners of the house. I didn't dare investigate. I stayed in my room, huddled beneath the covers, praying it would go away. But it didn't. Night after night, the sound returned. Scratching, scraping, dragging. Always the same rhythm. Always moving closer. The thing is, I don't even know what it is. I've never seen it, but I feel it. I feel its presence, like the air gets heavier around me. I've caught glimpses, fleeting images in the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. Nothing but the darkness and the silence, broken only by that horrible sound. Then, one night, it came closer than ever before. I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on the flickering light of the TV, anything to drown out the noise. The scraping, the dragging, it was relentless. But then, something changed. It stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. A silence so heavy, so suffocating, it felt like the world had stopped turning. I thought maybe it had left. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. It was still here. Waiting. I heard a low growl then, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably there. My skin prickled, my heart hammered in my chest. I could feel it, just behind me, in the shadows. I didn't dare turn around. I don't know why I didn't want to look. Maybe I feared what I might see, or, worse, what might see me. But I knew it could smell my fear. I could feel it, thick and suffocating in the air. It knew I was scared. And I think it wanted that. The scraping started again. This time, it was louder, closer, more urgent. The growl deepened, almost like it was savoring my panic. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, and wet. It was breathing right behind me. I could feel the heat of it, but I was too terrified to move. Too terrified to scream. It was close now, right next to me, and I knew, it was waiting. Waiting for me to turn around. I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I turned my head, just enough to catch a glimpse of it from the corner of my eye. I shouldn't have looked. It had no eyes. No eyes at all. Just two empty sockets, gaping black voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. Its face was smooth, featureless, like someone had wiped away everything that made it human. No nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull. It didn't look like anything alive. It didn't look like anything human. It was close. So close that I could feel its breath against my neck, cold and rancid. I could hear it now, the sound of its mouth opening, shifting, as if it was trying to form words. But nothing came out. Just a low growl that rattled my bones. I didn't dare scream. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my body too frozen. It was as though the very air around me had thickened, solidified. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. And then, it reached out. Its hand, if you could even call it that, was long, thin, and bone-white, with fingers that ended in ragged, broken nails. It dragged them across my shoulder as it moved closer, like it was savoring the touch. It smelled my fear. It knew exactly what it was doing. I tried to close my eyes, to block out the sight of it, but I couldn't. I was trapped. I don't know how much time passed. Minutes? Hours? The only thing I knew for certain was that it was getting closer with every breath I took, every beat of my heart. I could feel it behind me, its presence suffocating me. And the longer I stayed still, the closer it came. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what it is. But I know one thing, I can't escape it. I can't escape the scraping, the growling, the feeling of its fingers brushing against my skin. And I don't think I ever will. It knows I'm afraid. And I think it's enjoying every second of it. I moved into this old house thinking it would be the perfect place to start over. The price was right, the neighborhood quiet, too quiet, some would say. But I didn't mind the silence. I thought it was peaceful. I didn't believe in anything supernatural, and I certainly didn't expect anything strange to happen. But the house, this house, was hiding something. Something I couldn't understand, something I wasn't prepared for. Now, every night, I dread the moment the darkness falls. Because with it comes the creature. The puppeteer. At first, I thought it was just a rat. A small, quick movement in the corner of the room, barely noticeable. Maybe a shadow, maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But the sound, it wasn't like the usual scurrying of a rodent. It was too deliberate, like something was testing its movements, testing its space. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, and I was tired. The flickering light from the lamp beside my bed cast strange shadows, and my mind was already half drifting. But then, it happened again. A rustle in the dark, closer this time. And when I turned, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. It wasn't a rat. It was something else. A creature, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that bent in ways no human body should ever be able to. Its arms twisted grotesquely, like rubber, moving in jerky motions as it crawled across the floor, its spine bent and curved in ways that made my blood run cold. Its face, or what I think was its face, was a twisted mask of skin, stretched so tightly over its skull that its features were nearly invisible. But its eyes were too big, too round, and they gleamed in the dim light, locked onto me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I froze. For a moment, I thought it would go away. That maybe I had imagined it, that I was just too tired. But no. It didn't go away. The creature slowly began to move towards me, and that's when I realized with a sickening twist in my stomach that it wasn't just watching me. It was controlling me. I tried to move. I tried to scream, to run, to do anything to get away. But my body wouldn't obey. I felt my muscles tense, my limbs lock in place. It was as if invisible strings were pulling at me, guiding my movements like a puppet on a string. My hands rose, slowly, against my will, and I reached toward the lamp. The light flickered, dimming as I did. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. I felt my fingers close around the base of the lamp, and before I knew it, I was standing, walking, my feet carrying me across the room. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. The creature in the corner didn't make a sound. It just watched, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, as it pulled on the invisible strings, making me move like a marionette. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but all I could do was follow its commands. I couldn't feel my body anymore. It was as if I was trapped inside it, a spectator to my own actions, unable to stop what was happening. And then it made me do something I couldn't undo. It was late, later than I realized, and I had a knife on the counter. A kitchen knife. One I had used earlier to prepare dinner. I tried to stop myself as I walked towards it, but my body didn't listen. I couldn't stop it. My fingers closed around the handle, cold and familiar, but it wasn't my hand that gripped it. It was the creature's influence, tightening my grip. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but all I could do was stand there, staring at my reflection in the blade, my eyes wide with terror. The creature watched me from the shadows, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel the strings, the invisible force, urging me to raise the knife. I wanted to stop. I begged myself to stop. But I couldn't. The knife rose, slowly, to chest height. And then it let me go. For a split second, I was in control. But the moment I realized I was free, the creature snapped its grip back on me. I dropped the knife, the handle hitting the floor with a soft clink. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I didn't know if it was real or if I was losing my mind. I've tried everything since then. I've locked the door, I've stayed in the light, but it doesn't matter. Every night, it comes back. That same scratching noise, that same rustling. And I can feel it, always waiting, lurking in the shadows, pulling its strings. It's making me do things now. Little things at first, things I don't remember doing. I'll wake up in strange places, my clothes disheveled, my hands trembling. I don't know what it wants from me, but I'm terrified. Every night, I feel its cold gaze. Every night, it gets stronger, and I get weaker. One night, I woke up with blood on my hands. I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know who it belonged to. But I could hear the creature in the corner, its growl soft, almost satisfied. The nights have become harder to endure. As the weeks passed, the creature's grip on me grew tighter. It no longer waited for me to be still. Now, it was present even when I was awake. It pulled at my limbs, forcing me to walk to places I didn't want to go, making me do things I couldn't explain. I no longer had control. I became its puppet, its plaything. I'd hear the scratching first, faint and far off, like the sound of nails on wood. Then the rustling. Then, I'd feel it, its gaze, like ice pricking my skin, making my blood run cold. It would be so quiet, so still, and yet I would know it was there, watching me, waiting for the moment when it could make me move. I tried to escape. I tried to leave, but every time I reached for the door, my limbs would seize up, locked in place by an invisible force. It was like the creature had become part of me, tethered to my very soul. There was no running. No hiding. One night, the creature went further. Much further. It made me leave the house. I didn't want to go, but my feet carried me, stepping out into the cold night, through the woods behind the house. I walked, numbly, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The air was sharp with the bite of winter, but I felt nothing. My skin was cold, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. It led me to the lake, the one just behind the trees. I stood there, staring out at the dark, rippling water, feeling its cold gaze on the back of my neck. And that's when I realized what it wanted. The creature didn't just want me to move. It wanted me to do something. It wanted me to end it. To end everything. My heart raced in my chest as the creature whispered in my mind, pulling at the strings, urging me to step forward, to walk into the water, to let it consume me. I stood there, feeling my feet inching closer to the edge, feeling the cold kiss of the water against my toes, my body trembling as I fought the pull. But it was no use. The creature's grip on me was too strong. And then, as my body moved closer to the water, I felt something, a tear, deep inside of me. I wasn't sure what it was, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. I could fight it. I could win. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced my legs to stop. I planted them firmly on the ground and didn't move. The creature was furious. Its growls filled my mind, like a storm of rage. It tugged at the strings, pulling harder than ever before. But I held on, with everything I had. The pull lessened. The growl faded. And for the first time in weeks, I felt silence. The creature wasn't gone, but I had won, at least for now. I don't know what it wants, or why it's doing this, but I refuse to let it win. I'm not sure how long I can fight it. But I'll keep fighting. I have to. Because if I don't, I fear it will make me hurt someone. And I'm terrified of who that might be. It's been days since that night by the lake. The creature's presence hasn't been as oppressive, but I know it's still there, watching, waiting. The fight isn't over. I can feel its eyes, even in the silence of the night. And I know one thing for sure, it's only a matter of time before it comes back. But I'm not giving up. Not yet. I won't let it control me again. Not ever.